It was June 5th, 1944. Upottery Airfield, southern England. I was a 20-year-old private in the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles. If you read the history books now, the ones with the glossy covers and the colored maps, they make it look like a chess game. They draw big, sweeping red arrows pointing toward Utah Beach and Omaha. They talk about the Crusade in Europe. They quote Eisenhower telling us we were about to embark on the Great Crusade. But when you're 20 and you're sitting on a wet tarmac in the English rain, waiting for the order that might be the last thing you ever hear, you don't think about crusades. You don't think about arrows on a map. You don't think about the liberation of the world. You think about the itch of wet wool against your neck. You think about the grease paint hardening on your face, cracking like dried mud every time you try to swallow. You think about the weight. That's the first thing reality took from us. The feeling of being light, the feeling of being free. By the time the sun went down that night, we weren't men anymore. We were pack mules. We were hardware. We were inventory. I remember the waiting. That was the worst part. The waiting is always worse than the dying. We had eaten the meal, steak and eggs, the condemned man's meal, the guys called it. We tried to joke about it. Fattening us up for the slaughter, Miller said. Miller was a kid from Pennsylvania. He had a picture of his girl, a brunette with a ribbon in her hair, taped to the inside of his helmet liner. He kept taking the helmet off, staring at the photo and putting it back on. Over and over. Off, stare, on. It was a tick, a rhythm to keep the panic away. I remember looking around the hangar before we mounted up. The guys, they looked different. The stress had done something to their faces. It tightened the skin around the eyes. It made 20-year-olds look like 40-year-olds in the span of an afternoon. Some of them had shaved their heads into mohawks. That started with the Filthy 13, the regimental demolitions section. They were the crazy ones. They left a strip of hair down the middle, skin pale on the sides, war paint slashed across their cheeks. They didn't look like American boys who delivered newspapers or worked at the gas station. They looked like demons. They looked like they had already left the civilized world behind. I hadn't gone that far. I just had the paint, soot and chalk, jagged lines of green and black to break up the silhouette of the face. I looked at my reflection in a window glass. I didn't recognize myself. I looked like a stranger, a dangerous stranger. There was a silence in that hangar that had physical mass. It pressed down on your shoulders. It wasn't empty silence. It was heavy with the things we weren't saying. We all knew the rumors. We'd heard the whisper that casualty rates for the Airborne could be as high as 70%. 70%. You look at the 10 men in your stick, your jump group, and you do the math. 3 of you are coming home. Maybe. So you focus on the gear. The gear is the only thing you can control. You check your gear. Then you check it again. Then you check your buddy's gear. It was a ritual. I was carrying a disassembled M1 Garand in a Griswold bag, a padded canvas sleeve lined with felt that hooked onto the harness. That bag was supposed to protect the rifle during the jump, keep the sights from getting knocked out of alignment. It sat heavy on the chest. I had a musette bag on my back, packed so tight the canvas felt like wood. Inside, K rations that tasted like sawdust and wax. The breakfast unit with the potted meat that nobody wanted to eat but everyone carried. Socks, raincoat, a sweater. On my belt, a canteen, an entrenching tool in its carrier, a shovel that would become more important than the rifle some nights. A first aid kit with a morphine syringe. In the pockets of my jump jacket, the reinforced canvas ones with the big bellows, I had gammon grenades. Plastic explosive, about 2 pounds of it. It looked like a beanbag. You could mold it like clay. You could throw it, or you could stick it to a tank tread. It was unstable, nasty stuff. We were walking bombs. I had an M3 fighting knife strapped to my boot, a trench knife with brass knuckles on the handle, a .45 caliber pistol on my hip, and over all of it, the Mae West life preserver, a rubber vest that chafed your neck raw. Then the main chute, the T5 assembly, 30 pounds of silk and webbing strapped to your back. The reserve chute clipped to your chest, right under your chin. It made it hard to look down, hard to breathe. The leg straps dug into your groin every time you moved. By the time I was fully rigged, I was carrying nearly 110 pounds of gear. I weighed 150 pounds soaking wet. I couldn't walk. I had to waddle. When the order came to move to the plains, we didn't march. We shuffled, like old men, like prisoners in leg irons. The rhythmic clink, clank, clink of metal on metal was the only sound on the tarmac. Ground crews had to push us up the steps of the C-47s. We were too heavy to lift our own legs that high. I remember a crew chief, a guy with grease under his fingernails and a cigarette hanging off his lip, grabbing my harness and heaving me up. He didn't say good luck. He just looked at me with this pity in his eyes. He knew where we were going. He was staying in England. I hated him for it, and I envied him for it. I sat in the bucket seat, aluminum, cold, vibrating. The plane was the C-47 Skytrain. We called it the Goonie Bird. It wasn't a precision machine. It was a flying truck, unarmored, uninsulated, just a thin skin of aluminum between you and the flak. You sat there, shoulder to shoulder, knees knocking against the guy across from you. The aisle was filled with leg bags, extra equipment bundles we were supposed to drop with, radios, mortar rounds, machine gun ammo. They were tied to our legs with a 20-foot rope. The idea was, you jump, the bag falls, the rope plays out, and the bag hits the ground first, so you don't break your legs landing with it. That was the theory. In practice, that rope was a disaster waiting to happen. The smell inside that fuselage is something I can still taste if I close my eyes. High-octane aviation fuel, stale sweat, damp canvas, gun oil, and vomit. A lot of guys got sick before we even took off. Nerves, the vibration, the heat of the bodies packed in tight. There were no bathrooms, just a relief tube in the back that nobody could reach over the pile of equipment. So the smell just sat there, thick, acrid. The engines coughed to life. Twin Pratt and Whitney Wasps. They didn't hum, they roared. The whole airframe shook. You could feel your teeth rattling in your skull. The noise wiped out any chance of conversation. You were alone in a crowd. We taxied out. I looked at Miller again. He was staring at the floor, his lips moving, maybe praying, maybe counting. I looked out the small window. The sun was gone, just a gray English twilight fading into black. We took off. The Channel crossing was the beginning of the environment turning against us. We were flying low to stay under the German radar. 500 feet, maybe less. You could see the whitecaps on the water below, little streaks of foam in the moonlight. The air over the Channel was rough. The plane bucked and dropped. If you weren't strapped in, you'd have hit the ceiling. Then came the fog. The history books call it a cloud bank. That's too polite. It was a wall, a solid gray wall of moisture. We hit it over the coast of the Cottontan Peninsula. Visibility went to zero. You have to understand, the pilots, they were just transport pilots. They weren't fighter aces. They hadn't trained for this kind of formation flying in zero visibility. They were scared. And when a pilot gets scared, the plane feels it. The movements get jerky, the engine pitch changes, the formation broke. Standard procedure was a tight V of VS formation. But inside that cloud, the planes started drifting. Some sped up to get through it. Some slowed down. Some climbed. Some dove. We were scattered before the first gun even fired. The tight, disciplined stick of paratroopers became a shotgun blast spread over miles of France. Then came the flak. It doesn't sound like it does in the movies. In movies, it's a big boom. In the air, inside a tin can, it sounds like gravel being thrown against a metal roof. Clatter, ping, thud. That's shrapnel tearing through the aluminum skin of the aircraft. I saw the floor jump near my feet. A jagged hole appeared in the metal. Just like that. Wind whistled through it. Light from the ground started coming up. Tracers, blue, green, yellow. They look beautiful when they're far away, like slow motion. Fireflies, they float up gently. You almost want to reach out and touch them. They look harmless. Then they pass you, and they snap. Zip, zip, zip. That's when you realize they aren't floating. They're moving faster than sound. And for every one you see, every tracer, there are 4 invisible bullets in between them. The pilot hit the throttle. He wanted out of there. The engines screamed. We were going too fast, way too fast for a jump. Recommended jump speed is around 90 miles per hour. We were doing 150, maybe more. The red light over the door was on. We stood up. It was a struggle just to get vertical with the G-forces and the gear. "Hook up!" the jump master yelled. You could barely hear him over the wind and the engines. I hooked my static line to the anchor cable running down the center of the ceiling. I checked the line of the man in front of me. The metal snap hook clicked onto the wire. I tugged it. It held. "Check static lines. Sound off for equipment check. 4, OK, 3 OK, 2 OK. The plane banked hard left. Gravity threw us against the fuselage. The floor was slick with vomit. Men were stumbling, heavy with gear, trying to stay upright. We were a tangle of limbs and static lines. The light turned green. "Go, go, go!" I shuffled to the door. I didn't think. You can't think. You just move. I threw my leg bag out. Then I pivoted, hands on the door frame, and kicked. The prop blast hit me like a physical blow, a giant hand swatting a fly. It spun me. The T-5 parachute was a good chute, but it had a nasty opening shock. Because of the speed of the plane, it was brutal. The riser straps snapped against my neck. It felt like someone had hit me across the helmet with a baseball bat. I saw stars. My chin hit my chest hard. My leg bag, the extra gear, the radio, the heavy stuff. The shock ripped the strap right off my leg. I felt the tug, a sharp snap, and then nothing. I watched it disappear into the black. Gone. That was my extra. Ammo? My dry socks, my rations, my lifeline. Gone. I looked up. The canopy was open, a beautiful dark mushroom against the night sky. I looked down. Darkness. Tracer fire was weaving through the sky around me, but it felt distant now. The plane was gone. The roar of the engines was fading into the distance. It was quiet. That was the scariest part. The silence. I was falling into occupied France, and I was completely alone. I tried to slip the chute, pulling on the risers to steer, but the wind had me. It was gusting, pushing me sideways. I wasn't landing on a drop zone. I wasn't landing on a field marked with lights or pathfinders. I saw the reflection of the moon below me, not on grass, on water. The Germans had flooded the lowlands. They had dammed the Douve and Meurthe rivers. Miles of farmland turned into a swamp. And they had planted Rommel's asparagus, wooden poles 10 feet tall, wired with mines, sticking out of the water to tear gliders and paratroopers apart. I came down fast. We dropped from too low, maybe 300 feet. There was no time to prepare. No time to release the reserve chute to make a float. I hit the water. It wasn't deep, maybe waist high, but the mud at the bottom was like quicksand. I went under. The parachute, now a wet shroud, collapsed on top of me. It tried to smother me. This is where the training ends and the panic starts. I was tangled in the suspension lines. The water was freezing. My gear, that 100 pounds of wool and steel, was dragging me down. The Griswold bag with my rifle was soaked, heavy as a stone. I clawed at my chest. I found the release buckle for the harness. I twisted it and punched it. Nothing. It was jammed under the weight of the reserve chute and the swelling of the wet canvas. I was drowning, in 3 feet of water, in a French field. I was going to die without ever firing a shot. I had to cut myself out. I pulled the M3 knife from my boot. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. The water was murky, full of silt. I slashed at the risers. Nylon and silk are tough when they're wet. I sawed at them. My lungs were burning. I could hear my own pulse thudding in my ears, louder than the war. One gave way, then the other. I shrugged the harness off and broke the surface. I gasped for air. It tasted like swamp water and fear. I dragged myself toward a tree line. The mud sucked at my boots. Every step was a battle. It made a sucking sound, thwuck thwuck, every time I lifted a foot. It felt like the earth itself was trying to keep me there. I reached the bank and collapsed. I lay there for a minute, shivering, soaking wet. I checked my gear. My rifle was in the Griswold bag. I pulled it out. Water poured out of the barrel. I assembled the 3 main groups in the dark: receiver group, trigger group, stock. My hands knew what to do, even if my brain was frozen. I racked the bolt. Clack, clack. I loaded an 8-round on block clip. Snick, I was armed. But I was lost. I took out my compass. It was glowing faintly. But without a landmark, a compass just tells you which way is north. It doesn't tell you where the enemy is. It doesn't tell you where your friends are. I needed to find my unit. I needed to find anyone who spoke English. That brings me to the cricket, a little toy made of brass and tin stamped with the words ACME Thunderer. They gave one to every paratrooper in the 101st before the jump, a child's toy to save our lives. They told us the 82nd didn't get them, so if you heard a click, it was the 101st. The code was simple. If you hear a noise or see a shadow, you click once. Click, clack. If it's a friend, they click twice. Click, clack, click, clack. It sounds foolproof. In a classroom, in England, in a dark hedgerow in Normandy, it's the most terrifying sound in the world, because a clicker is loud. It cuts through the night. It tells everyone exactly where you are. It says, "Here I am. Come kill me." I moved inland. I stayed off the roads. I stuck to the hedgerows, the bocage. These weren't like hedges in a garden. These were ancient earthen walls, 6 feet high, topped with thick tangled bushes and trees, roots as thick as your arm. You couldn't see through them. You couldn't shoot through them. You had to crawl along the base of them in the drainage ditches. I heard a twig snap. I froze. My heart was hammering against my ribs. It sounded like a drum in my ears. I was sure the enemy could hear it. Tunnel vision set in. The world narrowed down to that one black patch of shadow in front of me. I gripped the cricket in my left hand. My thumb rested on the metal strip. The brass felt cold. Do I click? If it's a German and I click, he knows right where to shoot. If it's an American and I don't click, he might shoot me anyway, thinking I'm a kraut. I waited. Another sound. Breathing. Or maybe fabric rubbing against bark. I pressed the metal. Click-clack. The sound echoed. It felt like a gunshot. Silence. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. If you don't hear the response, the rule says you fire. You fire immediately. I raised the M1. I took up the slack on the trigger. I was aiming at the center of the darkness. I was ready to kill whatever was in that shadow. Then, from the dark, click-clack, click-clack. The breath left my lungs in a rush. My knees almost buckled. A figure emerged from the gloom. "Flash," he whispered. "The verbal challenge." "Thunder," I replied. "The countersign." It wasn't a guy from my company. It was a corporal from the 502nd. He was lost, too. He had a broken ankle. He was limping, using his rifle as a crutch. "You seen any officers?" he asked. His voice was shaky. "No," I said. "Just cows and water." We moved on together. That was the night. A series of terrified meetings in the dark. We picked up stragglers. A guy from the 82nd Airborne, way off course, miles from his drop zone. A mortar man without a base plate, carrying just the tube. A medic with no morphine left, his bag torn open. We weren't a unit. We were a mob. We had no radio, no orders, no map that matched the terrain, but we were Americans, and we had weapons. We moved toward the sound of gunfire. That's the rule. If you're lost, move toward the shooting. We found a sunken road near Sainte-Mère-Église. That's where we saw the cost. There was a glider, a canvas and plywood glider, smashed against a stone wall. Gliders were flying coffins, no engines, no armor, just wood and canvas dropping out of the sky at 70 miles an hour. The wings were sheared off, lying in the ditch like broken bird wings. We checked inside. The pilots were dead, crushed on impact. The front of the glider had accordioned in. In the back there was a jeep. It had broken loose from its lashings and rolled forward. The men in the back, they didn't have a chance, crushed between the jeep and the bulkhead. I shone my flashlight, just for a second, on the wreckage. I saw a helmet, a pack of Lucky Strikes lying in a pool of oil. A letter, half-written, soaked in blood. It wasn't graphic violence like in the movies. There was no screaming. It was just broken. Things that should have been alive were just objects. We stood there for a moment. The smell of high-octane fuel was overpowering. It burned your nose. We didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. We looted them. It sounds harsh now, but back then, it was survival. We took their ammo, we took their grenades, we took their rations, we took the morphine from their medical kits, we took the cigarettes, and we kept moving. Around 0400, the darkness was at its deepest. We were crossing a small orchard, apple trees. Normandy is full of them. The cider smell mixed with the cordite. The ground was uneven, filled with ruts. I didn't see them. I didn't hear them. The only reason I'm alive is because the German point man was just as scared as I was. He fired his Mauser too early. Crack! The bullet snapped past my ear. It sounded like a whip crack. That sound, the bolt action of a Mauser, it has a distinct rhythm. Bang, click, clack. It's slower than the Garand. I dropped to the prone. The wet grass soaked my uniform instantly. I tasted mud. "Contact! Front!" someone yelled. We opened up. The M1 Garand is a semi-automatic. You can fire 8 rounds as fast as you can pull the trigger. It gave us a huge advantage over their bolt actions. We put up a wall of lead. Bang, 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 ping. The clip ejected with that distinctive metallic ring. I rolled to the side. Never look through the same vision slit twice. Never fire from the same spot twice. If they see your muzzle flash, they'll aim for it. I grabbed a new clip from my cartridge belt. I shoved it down into the receiver. I smacked the bolt handle forward with the heel of my hand. Then I heard it. The sound every infantryman, Dreads. Zip, zip, zip. The MG-42, the Hitler's buzzsaw. It fires 1,200 rounds a minute. It doesn't sound like a machine gun. It sounds like canvas ripping. It shredded the apple tree above my head. Bark and leaves rained down on me. I pressed my face into the dirt. I prayed to God. I prayed to my mother. I prayed to the mud. I promised I would be a good man if I just got out of this orchard. Grenade! I pulled the tape off a gammon grenade. I armed the fuse. I stood up, just for a second, and threw it toward the flash. The explosion wasn't a fireball, it was a concussion, a dull whump that shook the ground. The machine gun stopped. Then silence again. We waited. Minutes passed. The ringing in my ears was so loud I couldn't hear the wind. We moved forward, low, sweeping the grass with our barrels. I found the German who shot at me. He was young, younger than me, maybe 17. He was wearing an oversized tunic. It looked like it belonged to his father. He had no boots, just low shoes. He wasn't a super soldier. He wasn't the master race. He was a kid. He was dead. I looked at him and I felt nothing. That's the worst part. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel sad. I just felt tired. I felt old, like I had lived a whole lifetime in 6 hours. I reached down and took his canteen. Mine was empty. I didn't care that he was the enemy. I was thirsty. The sun started to come up around 5:30, gray light filtering through the apple trees. The mist hung low on the ground, clinging to the dead and the living alike. The birds started singing. It was surreal. The war was raging all around us. Artillery starting to pound the beaches miles away, a low thunder on the horizon. But the birds were singing. They didn't care about the war. I sat down on a stone wall. I took off my helmet. My head felt light without it. My hands were black with carbon and dirt. My knees were bleeding from the crawl. I took a drink from the German canteen. It tasted like metallic water. I looked at the men around me. Strangers yesterday, brothers today. A guy from the 82nd was cleaning his nails with a knife. The corporal with the broken ankle was wrapping it tighter with a bandage, his face pale with pain. We survived the night. But we weren't the same men who got on those planes in Upottery. Those men were gone. They died the moment the green light turned on. I came home in 45. I got a job at the post office, married my high school sweetheart, raised 3 kids. I mowed the lawn on Sundays. I went to church. I paid my taxes. I lived a normal life. But sometimes, when it's late at night and the house is quiet, I'll hear a sound, maybe a branch snapping in the wind outside, maybe a floorboard settling upstairs, and for a split second my hand twitches, reaching for a clicker that isn't there. I remember the smell of the wet wool, the cold water, the fear, the sound of the cricket echoing in the darkness. People ask me what I learned. They want some grand philosophy. They want to hear about bravery and heroism. They want to hear that it was all worth it. I tell them this: chaos is the default state of the world. Order is just something we pretend to have for a little while. And luck? Luck is the only reason I'm sitting here and that German kid is buried in France. I think about the guys who didn't make it out of the planes, the guys who drowned in the fields, the guys who got hit before they even touched the ground. They never heard the shot. That's the rule. That's the only rule that matters. You don't hear the one that gets you.